In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Please be seated. The kids will go to the back where they will have a story read to them about Easter. Follow Meg. We're missing some. Well, again, welcome to Trinity Church. And for any and all who might be visiting today or have been away for a long time, all I can say is we're all very glad to have you in our midst. And whatever your faith, your thoughts, your beliefs, however skeptical, however dragged to church you might be this day, you are welcome later at the Eucharist to come forward and receive communion. I'll give those instructions now. We have this little round wafer, and when you come to the rail, either kneel or stand, put your hands out. Someone will put a wafer in your hand. If you need gluten-free, please say something. We have it, and we will give you that. Secondly, someone will come along with a cup of real wine, if that's an issue for you, and you may either dip it in the cup, your bread in the cup just to touch the wine, or take a sip out of the common cup. I've been doing it since I was 10 years old, and I don't think it's ever made me sick, so I think it's okay to do that. So please, if you just want to receive a blessing when you reach the rail, just cross your arms over your chest and I will give you a blessing. That being done, boy, preaching at Easter, you would think it would be the easiest Sunday. It's the first hardest after Christmas Eve. Because there's so many extra people. Expectations are high. My knowledge is somewhat limited. And trying to say what God would have you hear today means that you must open your ears not to me, but to God. The resurrection cannot be understood by anyone who wants to apply math, science, rationality, or logic. Now, it has its own logic, but it's not the logic of this world. The logic of this world is what happened on Friday. This guy's too good for us. He's causing trouble. He's going to cause a riot. He's going to cause the Romans to punish the leaders of the Jews. You know, they had all these fears. Here's this meek and mild man who never once asked his disciples to take up weapons and fight the Romans. Never once condemned the Romans for being in the land of Israel. And yet he was such a threat, he had to be put to death. As I said on Good Friday, it was not necessary from God's perspective. It was inevitable from a human perspective. But God had a plan. He had a plan to do something that does not fit science, math, rationality, or logic. He had a plan that fits God's logic. And that plan was to show all humanity that death does not have the final word. Now, as you might expect, if you actually go and read all four of the Gospels, or at least the portions that have to do with Christ's death and resurrection, you'll see that they're all over the map about what actually happened. Some people say it happened this way. Some of them remember it another way. All the Gospel writers were not there. The earliest Gospel, the Gospel of Mark, is likely the dictation from Peter. And John wasn't written till at least 100 AD, 60 to 80 years after Jesus' death. So memory, I don't know how yours is, but my stories change over time. I still tell the same story, but each time I tell it, I either embellish it this way or that way, or I forget what order it happened in, or I forget who was there. I confronted a girl that was my very first date and said, "You remember that time when we were in college and we went on a date?" And this was after the 7th grade athletic banquet was the first date. And I was convinced that a certain set of things had happened, and she said, "That wasn't me." Now, I didn't know whether to be insulted or to question my memory. And then I began to think, well, who was it? Anyway, memory is tough. Human memory of stories is that we tell stories because they help us make meaning out of life. They help remind us who we are. And the older we get, the more those old stories matter to us. Not because we're trying to bore you young people, but because we're trying to remember who we are and where we came from. It's important to human beings. So the stories about the resurrection are all over the map. Some say he said this, some say he said that, some say he told them, the first ones, he said, I'll meet you in Galilee. Others of them said he was all over Jerusalem. Paul reports that over 500 people saw him, and that he, as the least of the apostles, had his own vision of the risen Christ. Now, what I want to say to you is, if you were going to make up a story, and you were a Jew in first century Israel under the occupation of the Romans, and your hero just got crucified, would you really be eager to be running around town saying, I saw him, I saw him, I saw him. He said this to me, he said that to me. I doubt it. Now, John has the story where Jesus they're back in the upper room. All the disciples are sort of hiding, and Jesus is just there. And this one, Mary Magdalene, meets him in the garden, and she becomes, as often said, the first apostle who carried the message of the resurrection to all the men. Now, I don't know what you think about it, but it always has seemed to me like women carry the load when it comes to faith. Now, there's many faithful men here today, and I've been seeing you for months. But women have a particular intuition in general, and a particular ability to imagine love in a way that men sometimes are trained out of. It's not that we can't, as they were told, don't. You've got rational, mathematical, logical, and hard work things to do. Don't spend your time daydreaming, Scott. We've got cotton to hoe. Get your hoe and get out the door. So I can't say that I have a sermon in which I prove to you that there really is a resurrection from the dead. The day before Jesus was raised, it was already an idea among many of the Jewish thinkers that there would be a resurrection of the righteous. So it wasn't totally a surprise. But when we reach the day of Pentecost, or the feast of the Ascension, the day when Acts tells us that the risen Lord disappeared from their sight, went wherever heaven is, to be with the Father and was seen no more. Now that's a long time ago. 2,000 years ago that happened, if it happened at all. I'm giving all you doubters some grace here. But here's the thing. Why are we still here? Why are we still telling this story in the age of science and logic and math and rationality? Why do we tell it? It's because none of those things can explain to us the mystery of death. And we have doctors and scientists here who could explain the physiological process that leads to the extinguishment of thought and heartbeat. But then what? It's a mystery. And all of us, in some way or another, have to come to grips with our own death. Now, I don't mean to be a bummer on Easter, but you all are going to die. Every one of you. And you will face that mystery. Now, we can either face it and say it's an extinguishment, life is meaningless, and so I ought to just take what I can get before my day comes. Or we can think maybe the religious people might be right. That there is a creator who purposely brought the universe into existence. That there's a creator who purposefully, and I would say, I have a degree in anthropology, through hundreds of thousands, millions of years, evolved life on this planet that it led to, in the last little few seconds, human life that was conscious of their own existence and able to anticipate their own death. As far as we know, no creature is like that. Maybe whales, maybe chimpanzees, maybe elephants. They have big brains. Think how amazing that is. You ever look at the pictures of the Webb telescope thing? I know you look at your Facebook or your Instagram or whatever you look. You ever get those pictures where they're looking and say, this little piece of space has 10,000 galaxies in it and hundreds of millions of stars, and God only knows how many planets. This little piece up here. How immense is this creation? And you think it happened by it just pooped itself out of nothingness? I can't believe that. I believe something, somewhere, purposefully brought us to this point, and we have just a little bit of time to appreciate it and anticipate our leaving, because all human things are temporal. They do not last. Nothing is permanent. The Buddhists would agree with me there. So, reason can only take us so far. And somewhere along the line, if we're to have a meaningful and loving life, we have to learn faith. Now, I'm not saying you have to believe all the doctrines of the Christian faith to have faith, but everybody who gets up in the morning, puts on their shoes and their hat and their coat and goes to work or goes to school or takes the kids to daycare or stays home and cleans house and takes care of the kids, whatever it is you do, and you do it with some sense of joy and anticipation and love of those around you, that is a life of faith. And there are people in this world who can't live that way. They serve death. And they use death and the fear of death to gain power, wealth, acclaim, whatever, land. They will get their reward in my world. So, resurrection says this: Scott was a new graduate of the School of Theology at the University of the South in 1980. That's me. And I was sent to a little country church, beautiful little prairie Gothic, white sideboards, tongue and groove pine stained insides, little stained glass windows that look kind of Victorian in style. And it was in a county with 4,400 people, and I showed up with a big beard and hair down to my shoulders. There were more cattle in that county than there were people. And believe me, I stood out. Half the congregation had voted not to have a permanent priest. They were so disenchanted with the last one. So the welcome was a little tepid. And I was scared. I was just flat scared. I didn't know what to do. I had all this head full of knowledge from 3 years of seminary, and it didn't seem to apply to any of this. And I went and sat in the front pew of that little church. And as I sat there, I just put my face in my hands and I said, Jesus, I don't know what to do. You gotta help me. And you can call it active imagination, you can call it delusion, whatever you want to call it. But for me, in that moment, maybe in my imagination, I visualized Jesus next to me on that pew. The traditional Jesus, long hair, beard. It made me feel good that he looked like me. And robes. Typical Jewish appearance for his time. And he sat beside me, and he put his arm around my shoulders, and he just said, "Feed my sheep." Well, you know where that comes from. It comes from one of the resurrection appearances, where Peter, who had betrayed Jesus 3 times, met Jesus on the beach, and Jesus asked him 3 times, "Peter, do you love me?" "Yes." "Peter, do you love me?" "Yes." "Peter, do you love me?" "You know I love you." "Then feed my sheep." No different. But it meant all the world to me that there was a risen Lord who was by my side in some of the scariest moments of my life. And only because I asked, not because I was good or special or ordained, because I sat down and admitted, I am powerless, I don't know what to do, help me. That's all the faith you need. That little crack, that little piece of willingness to say, maybe there really is a God who loves me, who knows me, who cares about my life, who wants the best for me, can't fix everything, won't fix a lot of things that are our own responsibility, but would put his arm around your shoulders and give you direction. That's what I believe. That's what I've experienced. And all I can say, just as we do in the burial office, I hope for resurrection. I hope for it. I would like to have a life after death in the presence of God and all the people I love. I can't guarantee it to you, but I can say that hoping for it changes your life and how you live it. So thank you for being here and remembering this incredible, illogical, irrational, non-mathematical day of wonder and imagination.